This is Hashtag Gen Z, a podcast that explores Generation Z, who they are, how they're different from other generations, while also being an incredible blend of those who came before them. We explore what they think is cool, what moves them, and why they do what they do. I'm your host, Meghan Grace. So here's something I've been thinking about lately. What does financial freedom really look like for younger generations? Not in the hustle hard or retire by 30 kind of way, but in a build a life that feels aligned, secure, and free kind of way. If you're navigating student loans, side hustles, rising rent, or wondering what a 401k actually is worth in terms of your intention, this episode's for you. We've known for a while that Gen Z is financially aware and concerned about their financial future. We're now seeing it manifest and how this generation is approaching preparation for retirement. A number of recent studies have shown that Gen Z are more likely to be saving, and as a cohort, they're saving more than other generations did at their same age. And a recent Investopedia study found that Gen Z and Millennials outpaced Gen X and Boomers in overall savings increases this year alone. At the same time, Gen Z is also navigating a very different economic landscape and taking on new risks when it comes to investing, credit, and managing financial stress in real time. So how do we make sense of all this? To help us explore, I'm joined by Zechariah Schaefer, a financial planner and entrepreneur who's rethinking how wealth advice works for younger generations. He's the founder of Ascent Personal Finance, an independent wealth management and tax firm built to serve high-earning Gen Z and Millennial professionals, especially tech entrepreneurs, small business owners, and Henrys, high earners not rich yet. What makes Zechariah different in his approach is it's flat fee, advice only, and focused on real guidance rather than selling products or one size fits all. His passion is helping people go beyond managing investments or paying less in taxes, but really reshaping how the next generation approaches money, retirement, and entrepreneurship with their values and lifestyle at the center. We're going to be talking about how Gen Z is redefining financial success, why personalized planning matters, and how to make smart money moves without losing your sense of purpose in the process. So let's get into it.
Hey, this is William Tincup, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit about Practitioner Corner podcast. It's a wonderful podcast about the journey, the paths of how practitioners, both HR and TA, kind of go from high school, college, all the way to where they are right now, some of the things that they've learned, how they've been successful, people that thrive around them, etc. It's a fun podcast. You'll love it. You'll learn from it. Subscribe to it. Thanks.
I'm always excited to welcome a new guest, a new friend to learn from. And I know that for this conversation, I definitely have a lot to learn. This is kind of a continuation of our conversation on retirement and the mindset that Gen Z is taking into retirement and preparation. If you tuned into our last episode with Noah Scheidlower, like really fascinating stuff of just like the idea of structuring work and life. And now we're going to get really into the depths of how we take that mindset around the financial planning piece of it. And I think that's where a lot of people tend to drift to when we think about retirement planning. And so Zachary, I'm excited to have you here, and really, I know that you're a wealth of knowledge, especially being Gen Z and being able to tailor some of that content to your Gen Z peers. So welcome.
Yes, thank you, Megan. It's great to be here, and I love talking about finance and about Gen Z, but most importantly, I think life. Because the only reason why my job matters, I like to. It's cheesy, but I like to say that it's not about the numbers; it's about the story. And so, obviously, my job is all about numbers, but at its core, it's all about the people's lives that I'm working with. So I'm excited to chat with you, and many of my clients are Gen Z. So I'm sure we'll have some cool
I think this is going to be a great conversation. And I think some people hear like the word finance and they're like, oh, we're about to get into like the finance bro world. And I don't think that's the case at all. I think it's really, I love that you position it of life being a part of it. And this idea of like living with intention, as we talked about in some of our preparation calls, like how Gen Z is living with intention. But we're going to get to that. But first, we want to get nosy about you. Tell me a little about your story. I don't know if anyone grows up and they're like, I'm going to be a financial advisor, or maybe they are. I don't know. But tell me what you're doing now and how you stumbled upon this career and ended up doing what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, I will start with how I got here, and then we'll get to what I'm up to now. But long story, somewhat less long. I grew up, my dad worked on Wall Street. He worked in finance in Boston, and then on actual Wall Street. Later on, we moved to Connecticut. And so from a very young age, I was exposed to a lot of different financial elements, both getting to go to his work and seeing the actual trading floor, a real Wall Street trading floor. And I was 7 years old or something, and enamored by what I now know were Bloomberg terminals and all these fancy screens and people walking around doing important things. But then the other side of that was that, at least financially, my family did pretty well for a while there. And so I think I got to see both the positives and some of the negatives of that. But I did get to see the power of, or really looking back, because I was like 8 years old, 7 years old, didn't really understand at the time. But looking back, I got to see the power of managing your money well. That said, life sort of flipped upside down in many different ways. My parents got divorced, and that's a whole other story for another day. But one of the ways where things were flipped upside down was that my dad had managed our finances the entire time that my parents had been married, and he did a really good job of it. And with the divorce, my mom, life flipped upside down for her in quite a few different ways. She was trying to do her best to care for us, to protect us, to navigate this massive transition, and also to manage her own finances for the first time. And so, from a young age, saw the power of doing it well, but then also through the divorce and after the divorce, I saw how much stress, how much uncertainty, the mental toll that it took on my mom for her just trying to manage our finances well after the divorce. And for a time period there, we didn't know where we were going to get money for next week's groceries, or I had, pants with holes in them. And of course, a few years before that, I was, taking golf lessons from the golf pro at the local club. So the contrast there was very interesting, and things stabled out for us financially. But I remember just the hours and hours that my mom would spend researching things, or the fact that Rosemary at the local Bank of America branch, she was somebody, quote unquote, safe, who we could go to for help. Looking back, she was a nice person and a nice lady, but did she have the expertise, and was she really equipped to answer the questions that my mom should have been asking? No, but what I'm getting at is just here that I saw the value that someone could have in a person's life like that. And so fast forward a couple more years, I actually I had been fascinated by finance as a kid, but then I actually thought I wanted to go into tech. So got really into the technology side of things, the software side of things. Got really into crypto, building my own computers. I'm still a massive nerd today. And then through crypto, came back to finance. And so fast forward a couple more years, I was finishing up my degree in business administration with a concentration in financial planning. And I worked at a couple really high quality, top-notch wealth management firms back in Virginia, where I used to live. And one of the common denominators, really the most glaring one to me that I saw working at these different firms, is that you would have young people who, were my college friends, just a couple more years out, basically. You'd have young people who were what people now call Henrys, high earners, not rich yet. You'd have really nice young people call in, and they'd say, hey, my wife and I are both doctors. Our net worth is negative $500,000. We make $670,000 a year. We went to our parents' financial advisor, and he gave us a couple of pointers, and he's a nice guy, but he basically said, come back when you have $1 million to invest, because we charge 1%, and in order for us to be properly compensated, us earning 1% of your 10 grand isn't going to help, and that's not going to be a fair value exchange, because we could help you a lot, but it's just not our business model. And so I saw that conversation or variations of it play out numerous times. And the other side of my industry is that when you're young, either you can more or less go down a pretty linear path where, if you're lucky, you'll make partner some sort of minority equity probably in your mid to late 30s, maybe. That's one path. Not much performance-based compensation or other things in between that time, not much really entrepreneurial side. Or the other side, unfortunately, is that you can start out right out of the gate, probably not ready or equipped to actually help people. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. You're basically selling insurance products to your family and friends in pretty high pressure sales tactics. And I didn't like either of those paths. So I decided to start my own firm helping young people, which I saw that massive need. And then I recognized that I probably at the time couldn't help 70 and 80-year-olds with millions and millions to invest. But at the same time, I was arguably better equipped to help the young higher earners. So that was a couple of years ago. And fast forward to now. Nowadays, what I do is I run a small wealth management and tax firm. And what we do is we help business owners, real estate investors, entrepreneurs, usually in tech, to manage their money, to pay less taxes. And ultimately what it comes down to is that we help them to anything with a dollar sign attached to it, we're their first call. So we help them optimize things. A big part of it is them paying less taxes, especially entrepreneurs. But then really anything with a dollar sign attached to it, we help with. And at the core of it, we're helping them plan their lives. Like I was saying earlier, it's not about the numbers. Sure, saving taxes is great. Sure, making a little more on your investments is great. But in reality, the reason that's great is that is an extra ski trip with your family in the most valuable, your kids are only going to be 7 and skiing for the first time once. Or that means you can retire 2 years earlier, or you can adopt 1 year sooner than you expected. So things like that, that's where it really matters. But anyway, that's where I am today.
Thank you. I love that story. And shout out to Rosemary at the local bank. I hope she's living life, hopefully retired, I assume.
If she don't remember that much. I just remember.
Now I need to know. Now I need to know what Rosemary's up to. Yeah, we should be like, you on LinkedIn, Rosemary? What you doing, girl? But I really love your approach to thinking about anything with a dollar sign. You're the second person to teach me what a Henry is. Didn't know that. That's why I do this job, because I like to learn new things. And I think that you're saying what I've heard a lot from other people that are helping young people with money, is that some of the rules that used to apply from financial advising and financial planning for older generations just doesn't really apply for younger people today. And the economies can feel similar, but they are very different for the ways that life is unfolding for young people today. And I'm really excited to get into this. So let's think about the big picture. Mm-hmm. Thinking more of the mindset of it. What do you think most people are getting wrong about when they're thinking about Gen Z and retirement planning? Because you're 25-year-olds thinking about life 40 years down the road. That feels disconnected, right? So what are most people getting wrong about that?
Yeah, great question. I will say that my closest examples come from my clients, and my clients are probably arguably a small portion of that sample size, simply because I'm working with these really high-performing business owners, entrepreneurs in their 20s. But that said, one of the things, there's a couple different things. I think the two that come to mind instantly when you ask is, number one, I think there's this idea that Gen Z just isn't preparing for retirement and is sort of burying their head in the sand. And of course, like many stereotypes, like many things, there's a grain of truth there, which is that yes, a portion of Gen Z is burying their head in the sand. However, there's also a large portion of Gen Z that feels really strongly about preparing for things and getting things lined up. And you might think to yourself, well, that's a little weird. Like most people in their 20s, at least historically, haven't thought about that. And that's true. However, I think the reason for that is that, like you said, most of them, either they're angry about it or they're doing something to change, or it's both. But the economy that we grew up in is not the one that our parents grew up in or that their parents grew up in. And in many ways, there's a very strong argument that I mostly agree with, that it is harder today to really get set up financially than it was a few decades ago. And so I think they see a lot of urgency there. And also, I think many of us, either our parents or our parents' friends or just people that we know in that age group, did not prepare well. And now you see them, many clients of my own see their own parents paying the price, and they don't want to do that. And they recognize just how hard their parents are working now to make up lost ground. And they see, okay, well, it's not really that big of a sacrifice for me right now. So I really should get on top of this. So that's one thing. The other thing is that you mentioned earlier how, the advice that applied to parents doesn't always apply to the next generation, to our current generation. And I like to very diplomatically talk about that with clients, in the sense of talking about how just because a puzzle piece fit perfectly into somebody else's puzzle doesn't mean that it's going to fit into your own. And even if that same puzzle piece fit into your puzzle, it's still the wrong picture on the box, right? Like, it fit in, but is it the same picture? And so from a financial perspective, the number one thing in that area is renting versus buying. So many of Gen Z, so many of our generation, it was drilled into our heads: go to college, get a job, buy a house, you will be wealthy. And a big reason for why our parents' generation thinks that buying a house was the best decision is simply because it was one of the only things that they bought and held for 30 years. Buying versus renting, I could go down a whole soapbox on that, but that's the other thing, where a big thing that I've had to re-educate many of my clients on, and I'm talking about really smart people, they just never question the idea, because my parents told me and they did fine, so why would they give me wrong information? But renting versus buying in most of the US, and it's a case-by-case decision, of course, but most of the US, it's so much cheaper to rent than to buy right now. And that's another thing where I see people getting it wrong. And it's actually really sad to me, because then you'll have people who thought they were doing the right thing and they worked so hard, and then now they can't go on the ski trips with their friends, go traveling with their friends, go to things, because so much of their cash flow is going to this mortgage that they thought was freedom, but in reality, it's the opposite.
As someone who owns a house and desperately wants to renovate my bathroom, I have turned down the trip because I want to renovate my bathroom, right? But I do, we could talk about that bathroom renovation another time. It's because I travel so much. I want my bathroom to feel like one of those nice hotel bathrooms, And so your girl doesn't have, she's got expensive taste, but not the expensive budget, So that's where we have conflict in our life. So you do work, you mentioned a lot of high performing Gen Z clients, a lot in the entrepreneurial space, which I love. What do you think are some of the unique motivations that you learned from your clients when they're bringing that to the table around planning for retirement? Where are you seeing kind of those themes in motivation or those themes in concern in getting ahead, I would say in their 20s, so life looks different down the road?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, part of it is fear-based, but then more than that, I think so many of them, the ones that are really high performing, they're there for a reason, and really smart, really intelligent people, they're looking down the road and they're thinking to themselves, I love what I do. I love running my marketing firm or my tech business, or I love, doing sales for this organization. It's going really well for me, but there's no guarantee it's going to keep going well. And then number two, as much as I love what I do, I love my family. I love my friends. For me personally, skiing. I love the outdoors. Whatever it is for these people, they say, work's great. Many of them really love their jobs, but every single one of them that I can think of, they don't live to work. They work to live, and they don't see themselves not working ever, but they don't see themselves working as hard as they do now in the future. And so that's a big motivator for them to have time freedom. Time freedom is a massive motivator for them. And then I think partially, fear. They see their parents, or they see just the boomer generation, or give or take 10 years. They see how hard they are working, many of them, because they fail to prepare. And that's a big motivator to avoid that. But time freedom is really the main one, actually.
Yeah, I think that's a really astute observation. And really, we see that in the research that we've done for many years now. It's just, I think it's manifesting, right? Like economics is just the study of human behavior over time, right? That when we look at Gen Z's motivation and how they've made decisions, and, we've got that pulse point on really what matters to them, it is the freedom of time. It is the flexibility. And I think an element of it is this weird viewpoint on existentialism of why do I exist? What is my purpose? How am I spending my time on this earth? Because truthfully, it could go up in flames literally tomorrow. So why am I waiting till tomorrow or the next day or the next day to have that ability in my life to live it to the fullest? And so I think that we're now seeing it in the workplace, and we're now seeing it in what does life look like beyond work coming out, I think, a lot more, a lot earlier with this generation than previous generations. Because this could mean me just taking it to another level of the depth that I think is with Gen Z of they're not expecting tomorrow, but they are still preparing for it, right? Like they're not counting on it, but they're going to be ready.
Yep. I think a really big thing with Gen Z, and something that I love, and I think maybe this is jumping ahead to some of your other questions, but one of the things that I love most about Gen Z, and just my younger, because I guess many of my clients are in their 30s, and that's not technically Gen Z. But this next generation, what I love is how entrepreneurial they are. And for me, I'm very entrepreneurial. I always felt that way back when I wanted to do tech. I wanted to start my own software company, and now I work with a lot of people in that space, so I relate. But I love the entrepreneurial drive, and I think a big part of that is that, again, seeing things that unfortunately our parents' generation got wrong and wanting to fix them, and recognizing that you can either get mad at the system or you can take advantage of it. And sure, you can try to change the system, but realistically, on a macro level, you can either get mad or do something about it and take advantage of it. And so and sure, some of that's coming from necessity, inflation, high expenses, wages aren't growing as much as they used to. And so side hustles are coming, as a necessity, but then also people see, our parents' generation and how, the company man, if you will, used to get a pension and a Rolex and a retirement party, and now loyalty is almost, and arguably in many cases is punished. Um, and so I think they see that and they don't want to, be that. And so instead of getting mad, they're doing something about it and they're taking it into their own hands, which I love.
I think that's a great, like, some people would look at that idea of loyalty and be like, well, I'm not going to be loyal to this company because how is this company being loyal to me, right? Like, that's completely a valid viewpoint that Gen Z holds. And I think that you're correct that they are channeling their energy into what they can control, and it's how they invest their time and now how they invest their money. So let's get into that. I want to get into kind of the technical piece of it. That elusive 401k we all keep hearing about, right? What's Gen Z's relationship with it? Are they confused by it? Is there trust there? Is there indifference? Like, what are they doing, and how are you seeing clients approach this? And potentially, again, I know you can't give us like immediate advice on this, but what are some things that you think would be helpful for people to understand around the 401k? And let's just say if they're under 35, that they need to be really focusing on.
Great question. So I think I'll take that at a broad level first, which is just investing, and then we can get deeper into that. But first of all, a lot of folks. So the number one, I see a lot of excitement, and then number two, I see that excitement elicit action, and sometimes that action is educated moves, and sometimes, unfortunately, excitement leads to action, leading to mistakes because you were so excited that you took action. And I relate a lot of things back to the mountains and hiking. And so in my own job, I view myself as sort of like a park ranger, if you will, where I meet with people regularly. They usually have the tools, but I'm helping them get the next thing. And then we check in every so often. We have outposts, if you will, along their journey. And then if they need me in an emergency, I'm there. That said, Gen Z is really excited about getting to the top of the mountain. And sometimes they start running before they actually even know what direction they're supposed to go or which mountain they actually want to climb. And one of those areas is investing. So first of all, just to set the playing field, a really key point about investing in 401ks, Roth IRAs, et cetera, it is a massive misconception that a 401k or a Roth IRA is an investment. And I know that you probably know, but just a 401k, a Roth IRA, a brokerage account, et cetera, is simply a bucket. And it is a bucket that you can put investments in. And the investments are sort of like pebbles. And, let's just say that what's a fictional company? Enron came to mind. We're not going to talk about Enron because that's a bad example. Let's talk about, we'll use a real company, just purely for illustration. IBM, big company, public company. IBM is a pebble, and you can hold IBM in your Roth IRA, in your 401k, in your regular investment account. It's the same company in all three of them. The only difference there is the tax treatment, because the bucket is just a bucket that can hold stuff. The pebble's the investment. It's the same in each bucket. So the actual only difference is that when the tax man comes along and he sees the Roth IRA label versus the regular IRA or 401k versus the brokerage account, that's the difference, in that when you get a dividend or when you sell an investment for a gain or a loss, the way the tax man treats it is different depending on what bucket that's in. So when it comes to a 401k, for example, I think that 401ks are a great tool for Gen Z. The reason they're a great tool is not because they're a great investment, because it's just a bucket, but the reason for that is the tax advantage that comes with it. So the reason a 401k is a great tool is that, number one, one of the things unique to a 401k is that your employer can match how much you put in. And that's the classic, 401k match. And that is something that is really valuable because arguably on an annual basis, the stock market goes up around 8 to 10% over long periods of time. The annual amount over a long period averaged out. Of course, no guarantees, but that means that it's going to take you quite a few years to double your money. Whereas if your employer puts in $1 and you put in $1, then you just, or if you put in $1 and your employer puts in $1, you just double your money instantly. So the 401k match, that is a unique 401k item that is an amazing tool. But then specifically when it comes to 401ks and investing, the reason they're a great tool is a tax advantage. So the way that I talk about it with clients is that, first of all, we're going to figure out what mountain they want to climb, right? Then once we figure out what mountain they want to climb, we're going to figure out where they are and how realistic it is just in general. And then we're going to work backwards and essentially just reverse engineer the next steps to get to that mountain. In practical terms, how much money are you going to need eventually? How much money you need to save per month to get how much money you need eventually. And then now that we know how much money you need to save per month, how can we help your dollars work smart and hard? Getting them invested is having them work hard. Having them work smart is having your investments in the best tax buckets, which it's all coming together. And so what that comes to is that if a client says, I want to invest $6,000 a month, well, then we'll figure out, okay, how much of that should go into your 401k, how much of that should go into your Roth IRA, into your HSA, all the way down the waterfall, if you will. You start with the top bucket, fill that one until it spills over the next, to the next, to the next. And then you get to just investing in the regular brokerage account. So that's a very long answer to talk about the 401k, but overall, it's a great tool. The other thing that Gen Z has to consider specifically to the 401k is whether to make pre-tax contributions or Roth contributions. And a lot of people don't understand what the difference is, why it matters, what they should do. At a high level, pre-tax contributions, you get a deduction now. Great, you pay less taxes now. But nothing's free, no free lunch. The government's going to get their pound of flesh eventually. And so later on, when you take it out, you pay taxes later. Roth contributions, you put money that you already paid taxes in, and you never pay taxes on it again. So it grows, you take it out, tax-free. If everything else stays the same, there's no difference between taxes now versus taxes later. However, if tax rates get raised or lowered, or if your income goes up or down, because the more money you make, the more taxes you pay, that's where Roth versus pre-tax comes in. So for Gen Z, for those who are really driven, who their career is going to grow a lot, they're really expecting their income to be higher later than now, they probably should do Roth contributions. Because if they pay taxes, if they already pay taxes on it now, and their tax rate's going to be a lot higher later, they probably should lock it in. Whereas if they have a really high income now, but they're saving a ton because they're going to retire at age 42 and hang out with their friends and hang out with their family, then they probably should do pre-tax contributions because their income's going to be lower when they take it out. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. To me, it does. And I know the bare minimum about this stuff. I know that you should save for the future, and we're going to leave it at that. No, I got to shout out my friend Kevin, who is not on this call, obviously, but he's my finance friend. He's a CPA, and so he's always like, did you put any money in your investment account this month? And I'm like, okay, thank you. No, I didn't, but I appreciate the reminder. So this is really good. Now I feel more prepared to go into my next conversation, my money chat with my friend Kevin. But I think that, you're providing really good information, and there's lots of advice out there. Good, bad, engaging, factual, inaccurate. A lot of it is on social media, as you know. How can we be thinking about helping Gen Z kind of cut through the noise of that all and build more personalized plans that are going to fit them, right? Because I think, as we know on social media, it's a bit of a wild west, but there are some nuggets of truth in finding the balance between that. How would you suggest people could navigate that landscape and find the best route for themselves?
Yep, I think that is a really tough question to answer for the general population. I think at a high level, I'm not going to sit here and say that everybody needs a financial advisor, because they don't. Everybody needs a financial plan. Not everybody needs a planner. I think that for folks who have the income or the assets that could support the fees of a quality advisor, then for them to decide whether they need one, it comes down to, do they want to do it themselves? And if they want to do it themselves, then really it's three questions. Do I have the time? Do I have the talent? And do I actually want to do this thing myself? Because if one of those three doesn't exist, then at best, it's just a waste of your time. And at worst, it's really damaging to your situation. So for folks who do actually want to do it themselves, and they do actually answer yes to all three of those questions, then what they should be doing is a massive amount of research. Because effectively, they're going to have to know not everything that someone like me knows, but probably 70% of it or 60% of it, because they're handling everything themselves. And for them, I would really strongly encourage them to seek out lots of different viewpoints and to always question the data behind different things. And thankfully, I think our generation is better at that than other generations, because we've grown up in the era of misleading headlines, false data. We've seen our parents fall for it. We used to fall for it. Sometimes we still do. So I think searching out for varying opinions and always questioning the data. And then for folks who don't want to do it themselves, I think that It depends on where they are. For many folks, it's just not worth it for them to pay fees until they get above a certain income or level of assets. Um, and so for me, I meet with a lot of folks, and if they're not ready yet, usually I, give them some really good pointers, and then tell them, let's check back in a year, 2 or 3 years. And during that time, for most folks, what it really comes down to is uh, if their income or assets isn't high enough, then usually the plan doesn't actually need to be that complex. And it comes down to a pretty simple version of that waterfall, like I was talking about. And so for you kind of have to operate on some broad rule of thumbs if you're not going to do all the calculations on either yourself or have someone doing them. So around 15% of your annual income is not a bad place to start when it comes to how much you're saving. And then when it comes to what to do with that income, putting it in things like your Roth IRA or your HSA first is generally a good idea for most people. Obviously not everybody, but generally a good idea for most people. Of course, after the 401k match, because that's free money, right? You put $1 in there, your employer puts $1 in 100% instantly. And then aside from that, for most folks, really it's just paying off high interest debt, saving up, and then when they're ready, if they don't want to do it themselves, then at that point, seeking out either hourly help, project-based help, or ongoing help. And for that, I think for them, what they really should be watching out for, because it's unfortunately the barrier to entry to become an advisor is lower than I think many of us think that it should be. And so you really have to really vet who you're working with. And are they actually trying to get to know me? Are they trying to know what I'm searching for in life? Or are they asking questions that somehow point back to an insurance product being my quote unquote financial plan instead of an actual actionable set of steps? Are they asking me about my tax return? If they haven't asked about the tax return, I think that's a massive red flag, because basically every financial decision impacts the tax return or is exempt from it in some way, and it has a tax impact. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's very insightful. And I've got only a few more for you. So I know that we do have some Gen Z listeners, and we probably have some, let's just say, supporters of Gen Z or those who might be raising Gen Z. But there's probably people out there that don't know where to start, right? And I would love to know if you were to give a little bit of advice of taking the first step towards retirement planning. What could people do without feeling overwhelmed, right? Because we talked about like the vast landscape of information that's out there, and it can feel scary. But what's like a safe, good, confident first step that people can take towards that?
Yes, great question. Are you familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how?
I'm very familiar with it.
So for those who don't know, it's basically just a hierarchy of different needs that need to get met before you can move on to the next stage. And it starts with very basic things like food and water and lodging, and then it goes up from there into to the end goal, which is I think self-actualization, like living a fulfilling life, if you will. We don't need to get to that today, but there's sort of a similar hierarchy of financial needs, if you will. And at the bottom of that is, and I'm guessing that most people listening have heard this before, but spending less than you earn. That the foundation is your cash flow. If you're not spending less than you earn, then you are going to go broke eventually, unless you have an absurd amount to draw on. But that's different because you wouldn't be spending less than you earn. You'd be at a sustainable draw. Anyway, so spending less than you earn and getting your cash flow, at least a rough handle on it. I'm not the type of person who says that you have to know exactly how many dollars are going where and exactly how much comes in and exactly how much goes out. If that works for you, great. But at the same time, just having a rough idea of roughly what's coming in and what's going out, and does that align with my values? And then also, am I saving enough? And the only caveat there is that, spend less than you earn, number one. Number two, if you have high interest debt, then pay off the high interest debt. This is classic, Dave Ramsey type of steps here. Once the high interest debt is gone, that's where a lot of folks sort of have this now what moment. Because first step, spend less than you earn, that's pretty doable. Paying off the high interest debt, it's pretty easy to know where your extra dollars should go if you have student loans with high interest rate, if you had an auto loan with a bad interest rate, credit cards. Because the question of where should my extra dollars go, pretty easy, goes towards the credit card. After that, though, that's where the now what is. And that's where the sort of sea of infinite options which can be paralyzing for many. And I get it. If I find things confusing sometimes, and I can't imagine what someone who doesn't work in this industry every day finds. Um, at that point, that's where that, for folks who, for whatever reason, aren't ready to either hire help or maybe don't quite feel equipped to just fully do it themselves, roughly, saving around 15% of your income is a good place to start. And then maxing out your tax advantage buckets, like I was saying earlier, is a good place to start with that 15%. So things like the 401k match, and then after that, for most folks, probably the HSA or the Roth IRA. And then after that, it really depends on what, employer options or other things you have, but then investing the rest of that 15% in your regular brokerage account. And I will say, I have come across a not insignificant number of clients where they thought they were investing because they were putting 15% per month into their Roth or into the 401k or other things, and it was sitting there in cash. And that is unfortunate. It's great that you were saving, but that is just so unfortunate to have it in cash. So if you're listening to this and you're not sure, go make sure your money's actually invested in your accounts. What should be invested in? For young folks, roughly at a broad level, what it should be invested in is for most young folks, a pretty aggressive portfolio, mostly stocks, maybe bonds. But for a lot of young folks, they don't need to have bonds per se. Being all stock is not a bad idea for most young folks. I will say that a lot of young people sort of have this idea, and it floats around online of, oh, I should just buy the S&P 500 and I'm good. And most people, and I don't mean this in a pretentious way, but most people don't know what the actual S&P 500 is. And there's people who are going around saying that who don't know what it is. So having all stocks, great for a lot of folks, but making sure that you're not just concentrated in tech or concentrated in the US, having diversification among those stocks. Because what a lot of those folks saying, oh, just buy the S&P and chill, are doing is they're over-concentrated in the US, because the S&P is only US stocks, more or less. And 7 stocks, the Magnificent Seven, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, NVIDIA, I think one other, but I'm forgetting. Those stocks make up a good portion, like 30+% of the S&P. So you thought you were diversified, but actually you're really over-concentrated in the US and in tech. So I think those would be the next steps. Get your cash flow down, pay off high interest debt. If you don't have high interest debt, then start investing, and then max out your tax advantage buckets before you just put it in a regular investment account. I think those are some broad next steps that apply to most of Gen Z. Yeah.
That is, I think, very approachable. There's probably still some people that are a little overwhelmed, but I think you probably got them at the know what your cash flow is, because that's where you probably know this better than anyone else. That's where the hang up comes from, is not knowing that critical key step towards moving to the next one. So you've shared so much really good information. You've, I think, helped us understand a topic that can feel really daunting and really scary. Because running out of money makes everyone feel, I think, a little clammy to some degree. So thank you for everything you shared with us. But before you go, I want to just know, what's one of your favorite things about working with Gen Z? I know they're a lot of your clients, but they're also your peers. So what's some of your favorite things about this generation?
Yeah, great question. I think, like I mentioned earlier, one of my favorite things at a broad level about Gen Z is that many are not afraid to be trailblazers. They're not afraid to take things into their own hands. And they're not afraid to fail. And so, of course, that comes into what I was talking about earlier, which is the entrepreneurial drive that many Gen Z have. And I love that. I think it's a blast. It's part of why I love working with entrepreneurs. It's part of why I'm an entrepreneur myself. Because at the end of the day, I think because of seeing our parents or friends of our parents, we recognize that no one in this world is more motivated for your own success than you. And if you're not going to take it into your own hands, then who's going to do it? So I love Gen Z's hustle and the ability and the comfort with failure. I think failing's good.
Wonderful. Well, Zechariah, thank you again for sharing just a ton of really good information today. If people want to follow along with the work that you do and continue to learn from you, where are some places that we can send them? We'll also be sure to include these all in the show notes, but shout it out on where people can stay up to date with the great stuff that you're doing.
I think the best place is probably my LinkedIn, which is just my name. So Zechariah Schaefer, Zechariah spelled with an E, but if you spell it wrong, I'm sure it'll come up on Google anyway. And then, for people who are listening to this and they're just unsure if they're making the right decisions, or if they're thinking to themselves, wow, I'm probably leaving a really big tip for the IRS. I believe that everybody deserves one good meeting. And so, like I was saying earlier, I'm always happy to chat with folks. And a big part of my job is trying to figure out whether they're right for the limited seats I have on the bus. So I can't say that I'm right for everybody, but I'm always to chat with people, and at the very least, happy to give them some next steps.
It's wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, this is fun.
Hey, I'm Katie Van Horn.
And I'm Jackie Clayton.
We're your hosts of the Inclusive AF podcast, where we take on DEI, leadership, and HR without all the corporate fluff.
That's right. We've got decades of experience, a lot of opinions, and zero tolerance for performative anything.
Every week, we dig into what it really takes to build inclusive workplaces with honesty, strategy, and a few side eyes.
We'll talk about the tough stuff, power dynamics, privilege, what's broken in the system, and how we can all do better.
And don't worry, it's not all heavy. We bring receipts, laughs, and real talk from people actually doing the work.
Think of it as your weekly dose of truth, tips, and a little tea to help you lead with intention and show up for your people.
So if you're ready to push past the buzzwords and get into the actual work of inclusion,
you're in the right place. So subscribe to the Inclusive AF podcast.
New episodes drop every week.
Catch us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts.
We'll be here breaking it down one inclusive convo at a time.
I know I left my conversation with Zechariah ready to have an honest conversation with myself about my finances and thinking about my future. In the best way possible, Zechariah left us with some key insights for feeling empowered about managing money. So let's recap those moments and think about what we can do. First, money is your life story. It's not just numbers. Zechariah framed financial planning as aligning dollars with what you value, like buying back time with family or friends. So anything with a dollar sign becomes a life decision. It's not just a spreadsheet. Next, you need to run your own math on the debate of renting versus buying in your living situation. Owning a house isn't an automatic win right now. In many U.S. markets, sometimes it is cheaper to rent, and a too big mortgage can squeeze your cash flow, meaning fewer trips, fewer experiences, and sometimes more stress. So yes, decide case by case, but not by inherited scripts of the past. 401ks are buckets, so treat them like tools and fill them in the right order. Zechariah did a great job at demystifying these types of accounts that are often confused. These accounts aren't investments, they're containers for different tax labels. If it's available to you, grab your employer match first for that instant dollar for dollar boost, and then waterfall contributions across the best tax buckets from a 401k to a Roth IRA and an HSA. Who would have thought we were going to learn so many acronyms today? They should be based on your goals and your future tax outlook. Next, is it DIY or hire out? Use the time, talent, desire test and vet for taxes. Not everyone needs an advisor in their planning, but everyone does need a plan. If you DIY your plan, you'll need to do your research deeply. If you hire an advisor, just make sure that you're watching out for a major red flag is that anyone who doesn't ask for your tax return. Nearly every money move touches taxes. Seek multiple viewpoints and not just one-size-fits-all answers. Finally, there's a simple starter roadmap that works for most people. First, spend less than what you're earning and focus on high-interest debt. If you can, aim to save 15% of income and prioritize your tax-advantaged buckets. Make sure you're checking in on your contributions to ensure they are invested and not just sitting in cash. And finally, diversify your investments. Don't solely rely on the S&P 500 just because you've heard it the most often. Be sure to spread things out beyond US and tech-based investments. We learned so much from Zechariah, and you can follow along with his work on LinkedIn. We'll be sure to share a link to his profile in the show notes. Now we'd love to hear about it. What stuck with you from this episode? You can share about it on Spotify in the listener comment section, or you can follow, rate, and review us wherever you get your podcasts. This really does help more people find these conversations. We've had a blast this season, and we still have a few more months of new episodes to go. However, we are always looking for new and timely topics and insightful guests to feature. If you have a suggestion, you can share your thoughts using the form on my website. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram at Meghan M. Grace, and we can keep the conversation going there. As usual, I couldn't do this without the Gen Z team behind the scenes who bring this episode and many other episodes to life. This episode was produced by Callie Waters and edited by Leah Kramer. Thank you again for stopping by. Let's continue this conversation, and we'll chat soon.